This evening I was going to talk about, well, I could talk about, well, I'll ask you what you'd like me to talk about. Hands up for the Beatles. One, hands up for Wayne Rooney. Because he'd done Fell Wander by then. We knew he was born in 1907 in Blackburn. We knew his dad was a stonemason who was drunk a lot of the time. We knew he left school at 13 and joined the town hall in Blackburn, and eventually after years and years of evening classes and correspondence courses he qualified as an accountant. He first discovered the Lake District in 1930 on a short trip, and he wangled it in 1941 to come to Kendal and get a job up here. Took a demotion to come to Kendal to work in the Borough Treasurer's office. So those are the basic facts that most Wainwright fans knew about him. We also had an image of a gruff, unsocial person who was a bit of a misogynist. That's what we picked up from the books. Who preferred people to animals and preferred animals to people, and hated publicity. I'm glad you're concentrating. And that was roughly all we knew about him. So I started work on the book and went to see Betty. And when you do these sort of biographies, I've done lots of biographies, and when you have what's called a primary biography, you're the first person to do the biography, as I was with the Beatles. You're so worried about getting material, and you're so worried, you're sort of fighting your way through a jungle, and you're laying out tracks and paths, and you create these tracks and paths. You sort of lump stuff together, and if you get it wrong, people will soon show you got it wrong. But you lay out these paths which will stand for subsequent biographies, because they tend to follow you. So it is a worry. And I had very little to go on with the Wainwright material. How many have read the book, by the way? So I'm probably telling you, oh God, I'm telling you. I haven't told you everything you know. You better get it right. Actually, you live it for a year, you live it and you dream it and you talk about it and you think about it. But once you've done the test, you've written the book, it honestly goes from your mind. And I've had to get my notes out to find which year was he was born. You know, what was his wife called? And honestly, if somebody told me he married a woman called Frida, I would know that was wrong. But I have to think, that's right, that was D.H. Lawrence. It didn't come from Blackburn. So I had to. But what I found out in the book, which most of you have read, were, I'll just tell you 4 things or 5 things that amazed me in doing the book, and I'll tell you what I discovered subsequently. I discovered the interesting thing about the book was I discovered who Ruth Holden was, the wife who had allegedly left him, and she'd been a mill girl and met together at the local Methodist church, and he'd married her. But the awful thing was that he, for all the years they were married, it was only the first 3 years that he really spoke to her. For the next 30 years, he totally ignored her. He then wrote, the marriage collapsed, and I discovered from Betty, which I never knew was there, and she didn't know, well, she knew but had hidden it away. It was a 48-page manuscript, which I took stuff from for the biography, which Wainwright had written in the throes of his empty, disappointing shell of a marriage. And this was a fantasy about, he only changed his name, but he didn't change the facts, about he expected one day the woman of his dreams to come along. He saw her in his dreams. He was talking to her by the fireside, and she would come to his bed now and again. And he has these sort of sexual fantasies in this book. And it was clear to me, and he also reveals that he had no connection at all with his wife. And it was clear to me reading this and finding out about Ruth and talking to people about Ruth, that what Wainwright had said, my wife walked out on me and able to tolerate any longer my obsessions, that was the opposite of the truth. The marriage hadn't collapsed because she couldn't tolerate his obsessions. It was the other way around. The marriage had collapsed and he got these obsessions, walking on the fells all the time, as a way of escaping his unhappy marriage. That was my theory. That's my thing. It was his way of physically exhausting himself. It was a way of getting out of the house. Obviously he loved the walking, but he did it to to excess. He was obsessed by it in order to get away from those awful years of the terrible marriage. Many years later, long after I'd done the book, I was at a dinner party, actually in Cockermouth, and I met a lawyer there from Manchester. I said who I was. He said, "Oh, you wrote about Wainwright." I was his divorce lawyer. And I said, "Oh yeah, surely he got divorced in Kendal." He said, no. He deliberately got a Manchester firm of lawyers to handle the divorce, so no busybodies would find out in Kendal what was really going on. Because in those days, and he said, one of the questions I said to him, because she accused him of being a lousy husband, in other words, of neglecting. And one of the questions this lawyer asked Wainwright was, when did you last take, this is when he came to say, I want to divorce, when did you last take your wife out? And Wainwright says, how do you mean? He said, well, to a meal, to the pictures, for a walk. And he thought and he thought and he thought and he said, 17 years. Isn't that absolutely awful?
My wife would never tolerate
The other thing I discovered, which I didn't know before the book began, and this amused me highly because I got copies of it, was how much writing he'd done in his early years. I mean, he liked to say that it was only when he was retiring and that he set himself the task of walking the 13 years to walk all these fells. But in his teenage life, in his 20-year-olds, he had been doing lots of books. I mean, he did the Pennine Journey long before he ever got it published. And I think he did try to get it published just before the war, but he never admitted that. But the fun was all these magazines, like Private Eye magazines, homemade magazines, he'd done when he was a lad in the Blackburn Treasurer's office. He would sit, I have this image of him sitting in his high back chair with his quill pen writing away and all the other apprentice accountants, and he'd be writing little jokey things about all the people in the office and the girls they fancied, and he would do drawings and jokes and pass it round each of them, and the accountants sitting there watching him. I can see them all giggling and laughing, and he did these little books, and we reproduced some of the material because I tracked down 80-year-old blokes who'd been working with him in the office, all of them long dead, and they kept these little booklets he'd done. He did 20-page books, and he sort of put them together, not with staples, just with ribbons, and he'd do 2 or 3 copies, and he'd do half of them, even the people themselves couldn't understand the jokes anymore, but they were so funny because he was a brilliant cartoonist, and apart from the graphic designer we all know. So I loved doing that. I loved finding out that he was a Blackburn Rovers supporter. We knew he followed football, but I didn't know he'd begun the Blackpool Rovers Supporters Club in 1938, and he was in turn treasurer and secretary and chairman. And used to go to all their matches, and during the war he organised a trip to Wembley for their cup final. I think probably going to all these matches was a sort of winter time, was another escape from his house, because he wouldn't let Ruth go with him. And there's this awful vision, if I ever do a Hollywood movie of Wainwright, and that's not too stupid as I do in Beatrix Potter, and Beatrix Potter had a really boring life, and her biggest passion in life was herding sheep. So why don't they do Wainwright? And she spent the last 30 years of her life not writing a word. She gave up on all the books, and all she was interested was these sheep, and she used to go to Loweswater all the time. You know, tomorrow's the Loweswater show. She came lots of times to the Loweswater show to judge the Herdwick sheep. And I've got letters from her, which I bought when I was doing her biography. Sorry to get a side tangent. And one of the things I tried to do when I was doing my biography, she died in 1941. I thought there must be people at home movies in the 1930s who were at the Loweswater show who caught her. I've been to lots of places where people have actually showed movies from the 1920s, 1930s, home movies, little, but nobody's got Beatrix Potter captured on film, and nobody's got a tape recorder off her, even though she died in 41.